Some people hide in plain sight, carrying secrets that could change everything. Maria Santos had perfected the art of invisibility during her 3 years working the graveyard shift at Mercy General Hospital. To her colleagues, she was just another quiet cleaning lady who mopped floors and emptied trash cans while the world slept. They saw her worn sneakers, her humble uniform, and her downcast eyes. What they didn't see was the PhD in emergency medicine hanging on the wall of her tiny apartment, or the prestigious surgeon's hands that had once saved hundreds of lives in her homeland. But on one terrifying night in October, when chaos erupted in the emergency room and trained professionals froze in panic, Maria's carefully constructed facade would crumble. In the span of 20 minutes, the woman who had spent years hiding her true identity would be forced to make a choice that would expose not just her medical expertise, but a heartbreaking story of sacrifice, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. This is the story of how sometimes our greatest trials reveal not just who we really are, but who we were always meant to be. Maria Santos pushed her cleaning cart down the sterile hallway of Mercy General Hospital at 11:47 p.m., the squeaky wheel marking time like a broken metronome. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in that familiar blue-white glow that made even the healthiest person look pale. She had walked these same corridors for 3 years, 4 months, and 12 days. Not that she was counting. The night shift suited her perfectly. Fewer people meant fewer questions, fewer curious glances, fewer opportunities for her carefully constructed world to fall apart. During the day, the hospital buzzed with activity. Doctors strode purposefully through halls, nurses rushed between rooms, and visitors filled the waiting areas with nervous chatter. But at night, Mercy General settled into a different rhythm. The emergency room still saw its share of accidents and emergencies, but the general wards grew quiet, save for the occasional beep of monitors and the soft footsteps of skeleton crew staff. Maria preferred this quieter world. She had become a master of invisibility, perfecting the art of being present but unnoticed. Her supervisor, Janet, rarely bothered to check on her work anymore. Maria always did her job thoroughly, never complained, and never caused problems. To Janet, she was the ideal employee, reliable, quiet, and forgettable. Evening, Maria. Dr. Phillips is a member. Patterson called out as he passed her in the hallway. He was one of the few who bothered to acknowledge her existence, though she suspected it was more out of politeness than genuine interest. Maria nodded and offered a small smile, the same response she gave everyone. Doctor. Patterson had been working at Mercy General for 8 years and had never once engaged her in conversation beyond basic pleasantries. To him, she was simply part of the hospital's infrastructure, as essential but invisible as the heating system or the electrical wiring. As Maria made her way to the supply closet on the 3rd floor, she passed the doctor's lounge. Through the partially open door, she could hear Dr. Wilson explaining a complicated surgical procedure to a group of residents. Her steps slowed almost imperceptibly as she listened to his description of a cardiac bypass surgery. He was making an error in his explanation, a small one that probably wouldn't matter for the residents' general understanding, but significant enough to potentially cause problems if they ever found themselves in a similar situation. Maria's hands tightened on the cart handle. Every instinct screamed at her to correct the mistake, to share her knowledge, to help. Instead, she forced herself to keep walking. She had learned long ago that speaking up only led to questions, and questions led to discoveries she couldn't afford to make. The supply closet was her sanctuary. Here, surrounded by cleaning supplies and industrial-sized packages of toilet paper, Maria could let her guard down for a few precious minutes. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the medical journal she read religiously during her breaks. Even though she couldn't practice, she refused to let her knowledge become obsolete. Every advancement in cardiac surgery, every new technique in emergency medicine, every breakthrough in trauma care, she absorbed it all, filing the information away in case she might somehow, someday, need it again. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter Sophia. "Mama, I got accepted to Johns Hopkins pre-med program. Full scholarship." The message was followed by a string of celebration emojis and heart symbols. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she read the message again. Sophia didn't know the truth about her mother's past. As far as her daughter knew, Maria had always been a hospital cleaner who had worked multiple jobs to support her family after her father's death. The carefully crafted lie had been necessary to protect them both, but it also meant that Sophia viewed her mother's sacrifice differently than Maria experienced it. She typed back quickly, "I'm so proud of you, mi amor. You're going to be an amazing doctor." The irony wasn't lost on her. Her daughter was about to begin the journey that had been ripped away from Maria 6 years ago. Dr. Rodriguez had been different from the others. As the head of emergency medicine, he worked late nights and had observed Maria's work habits more closely than most. Several months ago, he had noticed that the medical journals in the break room were always perfectly arranged after Maria cleaned the area, as if someone had been reading them carefully rather than just straightening up. He had also noticed her reaction to medical conversations. The way she would pause slightly when passing groups of discussing doctors, the almost imperceptible nods when she heard something she agreed with, and the barely contained flinch when she heard medical errors being discussed. One evening, Dr. Rodriguez had deliberately left a complex medical textbook open to a chapter about emergency cardiac procedures. When he returned an hour later, the book had been closed, but several crucial corrections had been penciled lightly in the margins. Corrections that demonstrated not just medical knowledge, but expertise that came from hands-on experience. That night, as Maria finished mopping the emergency room floor, Dr. Rodriguez approached her. She tensed as he walked over, her body language screaming flight response even as she forced herself to continue her work. "Maria," he said softly, "I noticed some corrections in the textbook I left in the break room. Very sophisticated corrections."
Maria's knuckles went white as she gripped the mop handle.
"I don't know what you mean, doctor."
The annotations about the modified Bentall procedure, they're not something you'd learn from casual reading. They require surgical experience.
"I clean around doctors all day," Maria replied carefully, her accent slightly thicker when she was nervous. "You pick things up."
Rodriguez studied her face. "Maria, I've been practicing emergency medicine for 15 years. I know the difference between someone who's picked things up and someone who's actually stood in an operating room and made life or death decisions." Maria's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. This was exactly what she had feared, what she had spent 3 years trying to avoid. She began to push her cart away. "But Dr. Rodriguez gently placed his hand on the handle. "I'm not trying to cause problems for you," he said quietly. "But if you ever want to talk, if you ever need help with anything, I want you to know that I'm here." That conversation had haunted Maria for weeks. She had been so careful, so meticulous about maintaining her cover. The fact that Dr. Rodriguez had noticed meant she was slipping, becoming careless. She redoubled her efforts to remain invisible, to be the perfect employee who never drew attention. But hiding her true nature was becoming increasingly difficult. Just last week, she had watched a young resident nearly kill a patient by administering the wrong dosage of a cardiac medication. Maria had stood frozen in the hallway, torn between her need to remain hidden and her oath to do no harm. In the end, she had found an excuse to need something from that room and had accidentally knocked over the medication, forcing the resident to prepare a new dose. The brief distraction had given the resident time to double-check the dosage, preventing what could have been a fatal error. These moments of moral compromise were taking their toll. Maria found herself lying awake during the day, replaying scenarios where her knowledge could have made a difference but where revealing it would have exposed her secret. She thought about the trauma patient who had died 2 months ago while doctors struggled with a procedure she could have performed in her sleep. She thought about the countless times she had heard incorrect information being shared between medical staff and had been powerless to correct it. The weight of her hidden identity pressed down on her like a physical burden. Every day she carried the knowledge that she could save lives, improve patient care, and make a real difference. Instead, she emptied trash cans and mopped floors, watching from the sidelines as the profession she loved continued without her. Maria's story began 6 years earlier, in a small but well-equipped hospital in El Salvador, where she had been the head of cardiac surgery. Dr. Maria Elena Santos had been respected throughout Central America for her innovative surgical techniques and her dedication to training young doctors. She had published papers in international medical journals and had been invited to speak at conferences around the world, but her world had shattered when she refused to operate on a cartel leader who had been brought to her hospital after a rival gang shooting. The man was a known criminal responsible for countless murders, including the death of her own brother 2 years earlier. When his associates demanded that she save his life, Maria had faced an impossible choice: compromise her principles or risk everything she held dear. She had chosen to maintain her ethics, referring the case to another surgeon while she conveniently developed a sudden case of food poisoning that required her immediate absence. The surgery had been unsuccessful, and the cartel had blamed Maria for the death. Within hours, threats had been made against her family. Her colleagues, terrified of retaliation, had distanced themselves from her. The hospital, under pressure from dangerous forces, had quietly asked for her resignation. Maria had been forced to flee El Salvador with Sofia, leaving behind her career, her life's work, and her identity as a respected surgeon. They had come to the United States as refugees, but Maria's medical credentials weren't recognized without extensive and expensive revalidation processes. Without the time or money to navigate the complex system of medical licensing for foreign doctors, she had taken the only job available, cleaning the very hospitals where she had once hoped to work as a physician. Every night as she walked the halls of Mercy General, Maria was reminded of what she had lost and what she had sacrificed to keep her daughter safe. The smell of antiseptic, the sound of heart monitors, the urgent conversations of medical staff. They were both comfort and torment, connecting her to the person she used to be while emphasizing the person she could never be again. But Maria had underestimated the power of circumstances to force difficult choices. As she finished her cleaning rounds that October night, she had no idea that within hours everything would change. The careful balance she had maintained for 3 years was about to be shattered by an event that would make hiding impossible, and would force her to choose between her safety and her calling once again. The clock on the emergency room wall read 2:23 a.m. as Maria wheeled her cart toward the storage area. The night had been unusually quiet, just a few minor cases and routine admissions. Dr. Chen, the attending physician, had even commented to the nurses that it was shaping up to be a peaceful night. None of them could have predicted that their peaceful night was about to become a defining moment that would change not just Maria's life, but the lives of everyone at Mercy General Hospital. Sometimes the most ordinary evenings give way to extraordinary circumstances, and sometimes the people we least suspect of being heroes are the ones who step forward when heroism is needed most. As Maria stored her cleaning supplies and prepared to take her break, the sound of sirens began to fill the night air, growing closer with each passing second. She paused, listening to the familiar wail that had once meant she needed to scrub in for emergency surgery. Now it simply meant more work for her tomorrow, more blood to clean, more chaos to restore to order. She had no way of knowing that these particular sirens were carrying victims of a multi-car accident that would test every skill the emergency room possessed. She couldn't have imagined that within minutes, she would be faced with a choice that would expose everything she had worked so hard to hide. The woman who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility was about to discover that some situations make hiding impossible, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply being who you really are. The first ambulance arrived at 2:31 a.m. with its sirens screaming through the quiet October night. Maria heard the familiar sound of the emergency room door sliding open, followed by the rapid footsteps and urgent voices of paramedics. She was in the supply room, organizing cleaning chemicals, when the second ambulance arrived 3 minutes later, then a third. "We need all available staff to the emergency room immediately," Dr. Chen's voice crackled over the hospital's intercom system. Maria could hear the tension in his usually calm demeanor. "All available staff to emergency stat." Through the supply room's small window, Maria could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles reflecting off the hospital's glass facade. The peaceful night she had been enjoying was clearly over, but this was just part of working in a hospital. Emergencies happened, and when they did, everyone worked harder. Maria would have more blood to clean, more equipment to sanitize, and longer hours ahead of her. She finished organizing the supply closet and made her way back toward the emergency room to see if additional cleaning was needed. The hallways that had been nearly empty just minutes before were now filled with rushing medical staff. Dr. Cather had no idea what the task op is. Patterson jogged past her toward the emergency room, still pulling on his surgical gloves. 2 nurses she recognized from the day shift were coming in for emergency coverage. As Maria approached the emergency room, she could hear the chaos before she could see it. Multiple voices were calling out medical jargon at rapid-fire pace. Heart monitors were beeping urgently. The metallic crash of equipment being moved quickly echoed down the hallway. "I need 2 units of O-negative blood in room 3 now." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the noise. "Room 1 needs intubation equipment. The patient's blood pressure is dropping fast." That was Dr. Wilson, and Maria could hear the strain in his voice. When Maria reached the doorway of the emergency room, she stopped dead in her tracks. The scene before her was unlike anything she had witnessed during her 3 years at Mercy General. 4 trauma bays were occupied with victims from what appeared to be a severe multi-car accident. Medical staff were working frantically over patients whose injuries were clearly life-threatening. In the first bay, a young woman who couldn't have been older than Sophia lay unconscious with severe head trauma. Blood soaked the gauze bandages that Dr. Patterson was trying to secure around her skull. Her vital signs were erratic, and Maria could see from the monitors that her brain pressure was dangerously high. The second bay held an elderly man whose chest rose and fell with the artificial assistance of a ventilator. His ribs had been crushed in the accident, and Maria could tell from his positioning and the medical team's urgent movements that he had developed a tension pneumothorax, a collapsed lung that was putting pressure on his heart and threatening his life. The third patient was a middle-aged woman who was conscious but in severe shock. Her left leg had been nearly severed in the accident, and despite the tourniquets and pressure bandages, she was losing blood faster than the medical team could replace it. Dr. Chen was working over her, but Maria could see the frustration in his movements as he struggled to control the bleeding. The fourth bay contained the most heartbreaking sight of all, a small boy, perhaps 8 years old, who had suffered massive internal injuries. 2 residents were working over him, but their inexperience was showing. They were following proper procedures, but they were moving too slowly, second-guessing themselves at moments when quick action was crucial. "Where's Dr. Rodriguez?" Dr. Chen called out without looking up from his patient. "We need more experienced hands in here." "He's stuck in surgery with that emergency appendectomy," one of the nurses replied. "Dr. Kim is on her way in, but she's at least 20 minutes out." 20 minutes might be too long, Doctor," Wilson muttered, and Maria saw him glance toward the boy in the fourth bay. The child's vital signs were declining rapidly. Maria stood frozen in the doorway, her cleaning supplies forgotten. Every instinct she had developed over 15 years of practicing medicine was screaming at her to move, to help, to use her skills to save these lives. She could see exactly what needed to be done for each patient. The head trauma case needed immediate pressure relief to prevent brain death. The pneumothorax required needle decompression followed by chest tube placement. The woman with the leg injury needed vascular clamps and immediate surgery to repair the damaged arteries. And the boy needed emergency abdominal surgery to stop internal bleeding and repair his damaged organs. But Maria also knew that stepping forward would mean exposing everything. The moment she demonstrated medical knowledge beyond what a cleaning lady should possess, questions would be asked. Her carefully constructed identity would crumble. Immigration officials might be called. Her past could be discovered, and the safety she had built for herself and Sophia could evaporate. "Maria, we need you to clear the hallway." Janet, her supervisor, appeared at her elbow. "Keep people back so the medical team can work." Maria nodded and began to move away, but the sound of an alarm from the fourth bay made her freeze. The boy's blood pressure had dropped to critical levels. She watched as the 2 residents exchanged panicked glances. One of them reached for the defibrillator, but Maria could see that wasn't the problem. The child was bleeding internally, and no amount of external intervention would help if they didn't stop the source. "His pressure's dropping too fast," one of the residents said, his voice tight with panic. "I don't know what else to try." "Should we call for a surgical consult?" the other resident asked. "There's no time," Dr. Chen replied from across the room. "Do what you can to stabilize him until Dr. Kim gets here." But Maria could see that the boy wouldn't survive until Dr. Kim instead of taking care of it. Kim arrived. His skin was growing pale, his breathing was becoming labored, and his vital signs were spiraling downward. The residents were good doctors, but they lacked the experience to handle a trauma this severe. They needed someone who had seen cases like this before, someone who could act quickly and decisively. Maria found herself taking a step forward, then stopping. Her hands trembled as she gripped her cleaning cart. The oath she had taken 15 years ago echoed in her mind. First, do no harm. But what constituted harm in this situation? Acting and potentially exposing her identity, or remaining silent and watching a child die? The boy couldn't have been much older than Sophia had been when they fled El Salvador. He had the same dark hair, the same small frame. Maria imagined his parents rushing to the hospital, terrified and desperate for news about their son. She thought about how she would feel if it were Sophia lying on that table, and whether she would want anyone with the ability to help to remain silent out of fear. "I'm losing him," one of the residents said quietly, and Maria saw his shoulders slump in defeat. That was the moment when Maria Santos, the invisible cleaning lady, made a choice that would change everything. She abandoned her cart in the hallway and walked purposefully into the emergency room. "Doctor," she said quietly to the resident working over the boy. Her voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her body. The resident looked up, confused. "Ma'am, you can't be in here right now. The child has internal bleeding in his abdomen," Maria continued, her accent more pronounced under stress but her medical terminology precise. "You need to get him to surgery immediately, but first you need to stabilize his blood pressure with rapid fluid resuscitation and consider a fast exam to identify the source of bleeding." The resident stared at her in shock. "I'm sorry, who are you?"
"Doctor."
Chen looked up from his patient, his eyes widening as he recognized Maria. "Maria, what are you doing?" "She needs emergency vascular repair," Maria said, nodding toward the woman in the third bay while keeping her eyes on the boy. "The femoral artery is severed, and you're losing the battle with pressure bandages." You need to clamp above the injury and get her to an OR.
Maria. Doctor.
Chen's voice was sharp with confusion, and something that might have been hope. How do you know this? The entire emergency room had grown quieter. Even while continuing to work on their patients, every medical professional was listening to the cleaning lady who was speaking like a surgeon. Maria took a deep breath. Once she answered, "Doctor is confirmed reality." Chen's question. There would be no going back. But as she looked at the boy whose life was slipping away, she realized there was really no choice at all. "Because I am a doctor," she said simply. "I was head of cardiac surgery at Hospital Nacional in San Salvador for 8 years before I came here." The silence that followed was broken only by the beeping of monitors and the hiss of ventilators. Dr. Patterson stopped working and stared at her. Dr. Wilson's mouth fell open. The nurses exchanged shocked glances. Dr. Chen was the first to recover. "Can you help us?" he asked without hesitation. "Yes," Maria replied, already moving toward the sink to scrub her hands. "But I'll need gloves and someone to assist me." "You don't have privileges at this hospital, doctor," Wilson said. "You can't practice medicine here. That boy is going to die if someone doesn't act in the next few minutes." Maria replied as she scrubbed. "We can discuss legalities later." Dr. Chen made a decision that would also change his career. "Get her gloves," he ordered. "Now." As Maria snapped on the surgical gloves, muscle memory from thousands of procedures took over. Her hands stopped trembling, her breathing steadied, and the familiar calm of the operating room settled over her. This was who she really was, who she had always been beneath the facade of the quiet cleaning lady. "I need a scalpel and clamps," she said to the resident who had been working on the boy. "We're going to perform an emergency exploratory laparotomy to find and stop the bleeding."
"Here, Doctor."
Patterson handed her the instruments, his earlier shock replaced by professional focus. "What do you need me to do?" "Monitor his vitals and be ready with blood products," Maria replied as she made the first incision. "He's lost too much blood already."
As Maria worked, her hands moved with the confidence and precision that came from years of experience.
She located the source of bleeding quickly, a lacerated spleen that was hemorrhaging into the boy's abdomen. Within minutes, she had clamped the damaged blood vessels and was working to repair the injury. "His pressure stabilizing," Dr. Patterson reported, wonder evident in his voice. Around the emergency room, the other medical staff continued working on their patients, but Maria could feel their eyes on her as she operated. She was no longer invisible. The secret she had guarded so carefully for 3 years was out, and there was no taking it back. "How long since you've practiced surgery?" Dr. Chen asked as he worked on his own patient. 6 years, Maria replied without looking up from her work. "But some things you don't forget." "Why didn't you tell us?" Dr. Patterson asked. "We could have helped you get certified here." Maria didn't answer immediately. The question required an explanation she wasn't ready to give. Instead, she focused on suturing the boy's spleen, her fingers working with the skill that had once made her one of the most respected surgeons in Central America. "The bleeding is controlled," she announced as she completed the repair. "He'll need to go to the OR for a more thorough exploration and to close the abdomen properly, but his vital signs should continue to improve." As if to confirm her words, the boy's blood pressure reading improved, and his heart rate began to stabilize. The residents who had been struggling to save his life looked at Maria with a mixture of gratitude and amazement. "Thank you," one of them said quietly. "I don't think we could have saved him."
Maria removed her gloves and looked around the emergency room. The controlled chaos continued as the medical team worked to stabilize the other patients, but she could feel the weight of their attention even as they focused on their work.
Her secret was out, and now she would have to face the consequences. Dr. Rodriguez chose that moment to arrive from surgery, still wearing his surgical scrubs. He took in the scene, Maria standing near the trauma bay, the improved vital signs of the young patient, and the shocked expressions of his colleagues. "Well," he said quietly, approaching Maria, "I guess we don't need to have that talk after all." Maria met his eyes, seeing understanding rather than judgment in his expression. "I suppose not," she replied. "We're going to need to have a longer conversation about this," Dr. Chen said as he continued working on his patient. "But right now we have 3 more critical patients who could use help from someone with your experience." Maria looked at the other trauma bays where her colleagues were still struggling to save lives. The woman with the severed leg was losing blood despite their best efforts. The elderly man with the collapsed lung was stable for the moment, but his condition could deteriorate quickly. The young woman with the head trauma needed immediate pressure relief. She had revealed her secret to save one life, but 3 more hung in the balance. The cleaning lady named Maria Santos was gone forever. But Dr. Maria Elena Santos, the surgeon who had saved countless lives in El Salvador, was standing in an American emergency room with the opportunity to do what she had been trained to do: save lives. "What do you need me to do?" she asked Dr. Hastak Chen. The question that had seemed impossible to answer just an hour ago now had a clear response. She was a doctor, she had the skills to help, and people were dying. Consequences of her revelation would have to be dealt with later. Right now, there were lives to save, and Maria finally understood that some things were more important than staying hidden. As she moved toward the second trauma bay, Maria felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she had been carrying. For the first time in 6 years, she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The woman who had worked in silence was about to discover that sometimes the loudest statement you can make is simply being yourself when others need you most. The next 6 hours transformed Maria Santos from a secret into a legend at Mercy General Hospital. Working alongside Dr. Chen, Dr. Patterson, and the emergency team, she helped save all 4 victims of the multi-car accident. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon who had never stopped being a surgeon, just one who had been forced to hide her gift. The woman with a severed leg required immediate vascular repair. Maria worked with Dr. Sevaksa Patterson to clamp the damaged femoral artery and restore blood flow to prevent amputation. Her knowledge of microvascular surgery, gained from years of cardiac procedures, proved invaluable as she guided the younger doctor through the delicate process of reconnecting damaged blood vessels. "I've never seen technique like this," Dr. Patterson murmured as he watched Maria's hands work.
Where did you train?
Universidad de El Salvador, Maria replied, not looking up from her work. Then I did advanced cardiac training at Hospital Italiano in Buenos Aires.
His age and multiple medical conditions made standard treatment risky. But Maria recognized a technique she had learned years ago from a visiting German physician. Using a modified approach that reduced trauma to his already damaged chest, she successfully re-expanded his lung and stabilized his breathing. By dawn, all 4 patients were stable and had been moved to intensive care. The emergency room was finally quiet again, but the atmosphere was charged with an energy that hadn't been there 12 hours earlier. Word had spread throughout the hospital about the cleaning lady who was actually a surgeon, and staff members from other departments kept finding excuses to walk past the emergency room. Dr. Chen found Maria sitting in the break room at 7:30 a.m., still wearing the surgical scrub someone had found for her. She was staring at her hands that had once again been used to save lives instead of just cleaning floors. "We need to talk, Doctor," Chen said gently, sitting down across from her. Maria nodded, knowing this conversation was inevitable. "I understand if you need to report this. I know there will be consequences. The only consequence I'm worried about is losing the best surgeon I've seen in 15 years. Dr. Chen replied. "Maria, what you did tonight, you saved 4 lives. The boy especially, the residents are good doctors, but they didn't have the experience to handle trauma that severe. I shouldn't have been able to practice," Maria said quietly. "I don't have privileges here. My credentials aren't recognized in this state. Legally, what I did was..." "What you did was save lives," Dr. Strahr Rodriguez interrupted, entering the break room. "And before you worry about legal issues, you should know that I've already spoken with the hospital's chief of staff and our legal team." Maria looked up, fear evident in her eyes. And? "We want to help you," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling up a chair. "Maria, we've suspected for months that you had medical training. The way you organize medical supplies, your reaction to medical conversations, the corrections you made in that textbook, it all pointed to someone with significant medical knowledge."
Dr. EOBH.
Chen leaned forward. "We've been doing some research into foreign physician credentialing. There are programs available to help doctors like you get licensed in the United States. It's not easy and it takes time, but it's possible. The hospital is prepared to sponsor your application," Dr. Rodriguez added. "We'll provide legal support, cover the costs of the required exams and training, and guarantee you a position once you're certified." Maria felt tears welling in her eyes. "You don't understand.
There are complications. I didn't just leave El Salvador because of credentialing issues.
There were dangerous people who forced me to leave. If they find out where I am..." Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez exchanged glances. "Maria, we've dealt with doctors who were refugees before. There are protections available, legal ways to shield your identity while you go through the certification process. What about Sophia? Maria asked. My daughter is starting medical school. If my past comes out, if people learn why I really left El Salvador, it could affect her future. Or it could inspire her, doctor.
Rodriguez said gently. Maria, your daughter is going to be a doctor because she was raised by a woman who sacrificed her own career to keep her family safe and who never stopped caring about healing others. Rodriguez said, "Que pieces they say, dear." Rodriguez stopped caring about healing others. This is the book. It's about healing others.
That's not something to be ashamed of. Over the next few weeks, word of Maria's story spread beyond Mercy General. Local newspapers picked up the story of the hidden doctor who had worked as a janitor while secretly being one of the most qualified surgeons in the city. Medical journals wrote about the challenges faced by foreign-trained physicians and the waste of talent caused by credentialing barriers. But for Maria, the most important conversation was the one she had with Sophia when her daughter came home from university for Thanksgiving break. "Mama," Sophia said, sitting at their small kitchen table, "I read the articles about what you did at the hospital, about who you really are." Maria had been dreading this moment. "Sophia, I know I should have told you the truth. I know you must feel betrayed." "Betrayed?" Sophia interrupted. "Mama, I feel proud. Do you know what it means to me to learn that my mother is a surgeon? That everything you sacrificed, you did to keep us safe. But you thought I was just a cleaning lady," Maria said softly. "You thought your mother was someone who—" "I thought my mother was the strongest woman I knew," Sophia said firmly. "I thought she worked 3 jobs to put me through school. That she never complained no matter how tired she was. That she somehow managed to help me with my science homework, even though she supposedly never went to college." "Mama, I always knew you were extraordinary. Now, I just know why." Sophia reached across the table and took her mother's hands. "The other students at school, when they ask about my family, I tell them my mother is a doctor. Because that's what you are, that's what you've always been, even when you were mopping floors." The certification process was lengthy and challenging. Maria had to pass multiple examinations, complete residency requirements, and navigate complex legal procedures. But this time, she wasn't alone. The medical community at Mercy General rallied around her, providing study materials, covering her shifts, and offering moral support. Dr. Patterson organized study groups where Maria could refresh her knowledge of American medical protocols. Dr. Chen arranged for her to observe surgeries and procedures to familiarize herself with current techniques and equipment. Dr. Terez Helv. Rodriguez served as her mentor, guiding her through the bureaucratic maze of medical licensing. The hardest part wasn't the studying or the exams. Maria's medical knowledge was as sharp as ever. The challenge was learning to believe in herself again, to trust that she deserved to be called doctor once more. 18 months after that October night in the emergency room, Maria Santos received her medical license to practice in the United States. The ceremony was small, held in the conference room at Mercy General, but every member of the medical staff attended. Janet, her former supervisor, was there with tears in her eyes. The 4 patients whose lives Maria had saved that night were special guests, including the young boy who had fully recovered and was now a healthy 10-year-old. "I want to thank everyone who believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself," Maria said as she stood before her colleagues. "But mostly I want to thank the circumstances that forced me to stop hiding. Sometimes we think we're protecting ourselves by staying invisible, but we're actually depriving the world of our gifts." Sophia, now in her 2nd year of medical school, stood in the back of the room beaming with pride. "My mom, the doctor," she had started introducing Maria to her friends. "Not my mom who used to clean hospitals, but simply my mom, the doctor," as if there had never been any other identity. Dr. Maria Santos was assigned to the cardiac surgery department at Mercy General, but she maintained a close relationship with the emergency room. Once a month she worked the night shift in emergency, partly because she enjoyed the variety and pace, but mostly because she never wanted to forget the lesson she had learned that October night. 2 years later, Maria was invited to speak at a medical conference about the challenges faced by foreign-trained physicians. As she stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of doctors, she thought about how far she had traveled, not just geographically, but personally. "My name is Dr. Tu Padmano Maria Santos," she began, "and I want to tell you about the 6 years I spent trying to be invisible." She spoke about the weight of hidden identity, about the moral injury of watching medical errors while being unable to correct them, and about the moment when circumstances forced her to choose between safety and purpose. I learned that you can't separate who you are from what you do, she told the audience. I was a doctor when I was cleaning floors just as much as I am a doctor when I'm performing surgery. The difference was that I finally accepted it. And more importantly, I finally accepted that the world needed me to be who I really was. After her presentation, a young woman approached her, a foreign-trained physician working as a medical interpreter while trying to get certified in the United States. Dr. Santos, the woman said in accented English, your story gives me hope. I've been thinking about giving up, about accepting that I'll never practice medicine again. Maria looked at the woman and saw herself from 6 years earlier, talented, educated, but beaten down by circumstances and systems. What's your specialty? She asked. Pediatric oncology. I treated children with cancer in Syria before the war. The world needs pediatric oncologists, Maria said firmly. More importantly, there are children with cancer who need doctors who understand their suffering, who have seen what you've seen. Don't give up. Find people who will help you, and don't be afraid to show them who you really are. As Maria drove home that evening, she passed Mercy General Hospital. The building looked different to her now. Not like a place where she had hidden for 3 years, but like the place where she had found herself again. The night shift was beginning, and she could see the emergency room lights through the windows. She thought about the cleaning staff who were beginning their rounds, and wondered if any of them carried secrets like she had. She wondered if there were other hidden doctors, engineers, teachers, or artists working in invisible jobs while their true talents remained dormant. But mostly, she thought about Sophia, who was now in her residency and following in her mother's footsteps, not just as a doctor, but as someone who understood that healing others was both a profession and a calling. Maria Santos had learned that you can hide your identity, but you can't hide your nature. You can suppress your gifts, but you can't eliminate them. And sometimes, when people need you most, the greatest act of courage is simply being exactly who you were always meant to be. The woman who had worked the night shift in silence had discovered something powerful, that her voice, when she finally chose to use it, could save lives. And in saving others, she had ultimately saved herself. Today, Dr. Maria Santos performs cardiac surgeries at Mercy General Hospital. Her office wall displays her medical degree from El Salvador alongside her American medical license. Between them hangs a photo from that October night 6 years ago, a picture of the emergency room team, including Maria in her surgical scrubs, taken after they had saved 4 lives together. But the most treasured item in her office is a small plaque that Sophia gave her on the day she received her American medical license. It reads simply, Dr. Maria Santos, the doctor you always were, the mother I always knew you to be. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin with ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Maria's story reminds us that heroism isn't always about dramatic gestures or public recognition. Sometimes it's about a cleaning lady who decides to save a life knowing it will cost her the safety of invisibility. Sometimes it's about a refugee who refuses to let circumstances define her worth. And sometimes it's about a mother who teaches her daughter that being true to yourself is the most important lesson of all. Maria Santos worked the night shift in silence. But when the moment came to speak, her voice changed everything, not just for the patients she saved, but for every person who has ever felt that their true self must remain hidden. Her story proves that no matter how long we spend in the shadows, we never lose the ability to step into the light when others need us most.